We have the great pleasure and honor of being joined by Gregg Marcel Dixon, who is running for Congress in South Carolina's 6th District as a primary challenger to the infamous James Clyburn. Marcel, thank you so much for running. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for stepping up and doing what you're doing. It's long overdue someone do this, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. And trust me, I've been living through it and my family's been living through it. So it's long overdue that anyone really at this point, a flower pot, replace this person.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just want to jump right in and talk a little bit about James Clyburn's district because I know James Clyburn as a power broker inside the Democratic Party, a kingmaker of sorts, revived Joe Biden's campaign pretty much from the dead in the 2020 primaries. But I had not known until very recently the horrible shape that his home district is in. So this is the district that you're running to make your own. South Carolina's is the sixth poorest district in the country, and that statistic is really just the tip of the iceberg. So in terms of like child poverty, education, healthcare access, this district just kind of ranks miserably all across the board. So can you speak to the state of your district and Clyburn's failures as a rep before we get into more?
Well, I'm not surprised you wouldn't know his district was in such bad shape because he's never here. Outside of playing golf, he's never really spending time going around his district nor speaking to people. So it's easy to forget that he's responsible for a district in South Carolina. As you already mentioned, his district is the sixth poorest by net worth in the United States of America. As of 2021, there were 435 districts. His district is poorer than 429 other districts in the country, so almost
Wow.
the poorest in the nation. For children, it is the
So
third
so
poorest.
so what is there? There are only four poorer districts. Is that right?
Yes, five poor. Yes,
Five. Wow.
right.
Wow.
And so for children, it's the third poorest in the United States of America. His district has the worst water quality in the nation, some of the highest levels of toxicity, highest eviction rate, some of the worst health outcomes for any district in the United States of America. In Richland County, where the capital city, Columbia, is located, there is one community, majority Black community, as his district is a majority Black district, 50 to 60% majority Black. There has been so many amputations of the Black residents there, their toes and fingers, legs and arms being chopped off, that a whole expo had to be written about it. And they discovered that these people had such poor health outcomes because they live in food deserts, which means you go for 10 miles or more and not be able to have access to a grocery store. That exists all throughout his district. There's also healthcare deserts where you can go 10 miles or more and not be able to pass a hospital or a doctor's clinic. That exists all throughout his district. So for preventable reasons, these people are getting their limbs chopped off. And once your limb is chopped off, usually only given 3 years further to live because of lack of mobility and poor circulation. There's a town in his district, Denmark, South Carolina. It's a small town of no more than 3 to 4,000 people, but it has two HBCUs, Voorhees College and Denmark Tech. They haven't had clean water in over 10 years. The unapproved, untested chemical was being put in their water supply. And you think Clyburn would be shouting about this from the rooftop. He has not. Bernie Sanders actually bought a pallet of clean drinking water for the residents there. Now they're telling people the water is fine now. They said that in Flint, Michigan too, and we saw how that went. So people there don't believe it at all. His district is also one of the highest in regards to land theft. The Gullah Geechee people, a Creole culture of Black Americans who are descendants of rice-growing Africans. I am one of them. We have had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of acres of coastal acres, riverfront, oceanfront, stolen from us. And with that, trillions of dollars in wealth taken from us as well. And we live on a system called heirs property, where you have to share the property you inherit without a will from your ancestor. Someone loses their share, everyone's liable to lose their property. And for decades, that's exactly what happened. Clyburn has done nothing about the issue of Black land theft, let alone many other topics. So those are just a synopsis of how things are here.
Yeah,
So
sorry, Russell, go ahead.
why does he keep getting returned to Congress? Why do people
haven't
keep
really
voting
had
for him?
people haven't had any options, to be honest with you. It's almost like you have grits for breakfast, or the other option is grits for breakfast. You're going to eat grits. He's really been the only option since he's been in office. He's had a few primaries here and there, but none have really been a legitimate threat to him. That's on record. And really, he's gone as long as entire decades without being primaried. And the truth of the matter is, most Americans of any racial, ethnic demographic, over half of their demographic is not voting. So it's not that most people are voting for Clyburn, it's that among the segment of the population that does vote, he gets the majority of those votes. And it really does come from his image as an older Black Southern man. People look at him and they think that because of him being Black, him having to live through Jim Crow, redlining, and all the other horrors through which Black American descendants of American slaves have survived, people imagine he has our best interests at heart. Also, the truth of the matter is a lot of people do not do their due diligence and do their research. I never bothered to research his record until I did. And once I did, that's when I said, this cannot continue. People don't realize how neglectful he's been towards us. It's people think that he's up there trying, and people make excuses for him. When you bring out how bad our district is, people want to blame the Republicans. That's not flying with me. Black Americans vote 90 to 95% for the Democrats. Without Black Americans, there will be no Democratic Party. So when I want results for my people, I'm not going to look at the Republicans. They're not getting most of our votes. The Democrats are. And also, people want to give to him both sides of the argument. They want to say, look at the good things he's done, which is very little. And they want to give him credit for the good. And at the same time, don't want him to take responsibility for the bad. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. You don't get to claim credit for the good and then absolve yourself of responsibility for the bad. So there's been a lot of excuses made for him. It's a lot of a lack of knowledge about how bad his record's been. People think he's trying to do good by us and he's just being given a difficult time by Republicans. That is not the truth. When it comes to land theft of Black Americans, I've searched his record. Not one piece of legislation has he written to help us get compensated for the land we've stolen, to help deal with the issue of heirs property. It's a state level matter, but it could be dealt with at the federal level, as with many things. You look at the schools in my district, some of the lowest performing schools. We all know that the reason why schools have inherent problems, one of the reasons at least, is because of the way they're funded. If you live in a rich zip code, your property taxes are this high, your school gets more funded. Poor zip code, like where I live and grew up, where I still live, your property taxes are here. I have a plan to make sure that each school district gets a state standard so that each kid get a quality education, where the federal government will fill in the balance so every school district can get that level of funding. It'll go straight to the school board, bypassing all the politics of the Department of Education. Clyburn has had 30 years, and just those two examples, Black land theft, heirs property, and school funding, to do legislation for it, and he has not. So people are not familiar with his record, but because of me, they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how responsible is the media for upholding the reputation of this man? Because honestly, and I'm being totally honest, this is not something that I would have felt comfortable saying a few days ago. Part of the reason I was so thrilled to find out that you were running is because white guys like Russell and I can't say a lot of the things you said because of his bio, right? There's just this like hesitation to go there. I think that's true of tiny little indie media people like us, and even big media giants like CNN, MSNBC. And so, how much are they to blame for this? Because you would never know about his district watching these networks. He comes on all the time. They never talk about the state of his district.
Al Sharpton, Joy Reid, Tiffany Cars, Craig Melvin, who is from South Carolina. I forgot the other gentleman's name. He's very well respected. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's an older gentleman, has a baritone voice. I forgot his name, but he's from Orangeburg, South Carolina, Clyburn's district. Craig Melvin, the other gentleman, I cannot remember his name, but he's always on MSNBC as a commentator. Those two gentlemen are from South Carolina. Okay. I don't care which part they're from. One of them I know is from Orangeburg, okay, a city where that's 86% Black. The county is like 87% Black, and the poverty rate among Black Americans there is over 80%. The average poverty rate for the United States of America is 11%. You come to my county, you go to surrounding counties like Hampton County, Allendale County. Allendale County has a poverty rate of 68%. For the Black residents there, it's 70% Black, it's over 90% poverty rate. These are astronomical figures. Yet you won't hear Joy Reid talking about this. You won't hear Al Sharpton talking about this. They're sitting there giving him praise as the kingmaker because he endorsed a guy who was good friends with segregationists and former Ku Klux Klan members who wrote the 1994 crime bill that Clyburn supported that put more Black people in bondage since the days of slavery, who passed a bill working with Strom Thurmond, a notorious anti-Black racist from South Carolina, who has the record of the longest filibuster on record, all because he didn't want Black Americans to get any possible access to equality or equity. He worked with him to do a disparity between hard, solid crack cocaine, powder cocaine. Powder cocaine, mainly used by white Americans, was almost basically decriminalized. If you use rock cocaine, that was mainly used by Black Americans, you were put in prison for years. Your whole family shattered instead of being given resources. Clyburn endorsed this Joe Biden guy, the segregationist, as I call him. And yet, while being in office, Joe Biden has done executive orders for every other group. Asians, LGBTQ, Native Americans have had historic levels of funding underneath the Biden administration. But he said to Black Americans, he would have our backs. That's the promise he made. Yet, under his administration, every other group's unemployment rate has gone down. Black Americans' unemployment has increased. Black men's unemployment rate has surged. Under his administration, Black people are still being unjustifiably murdered by police officers. Under his administration, Black Americans are still far to the bottom in terms of wealth. If you took Black Americans out, the average American family have $122,000 in wealth. Black Americans only $24,000. When slavery ended, we owned 0.5% of the nation's wealth. Today, we are only at 2.6.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
Under this guy's administration, Joe Biden's, COVID-19 wiped out 50% of Black businesses. I have yet to hear any specific policy that he is pursuing to help bring back Black businesses or Black Wall Streets. The one initiative that should have been for us, the Freeman's Bank initiative. Freeman's Bank were for my ancestors. The first Freeman's Bank was right here. I'm in Ridgeland. Beaufort, South Carolina is only like 20 minutes from me. The first Freeman's Bank was right there. My great-great-great-granduncle had an account with them. That was for Black Americans to build up wealth.
Can you explain to our viewers what the Freeman's Bank is?
Sure. The Freeman's Bank was a bank started by Congress, and it was for Black veterans who have fought in the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln said, without the Negro, the Union would have fallen. That's Abraham Lincoln's words, that pretty much Black Americans saved the Union. We're always saving the nation. It never shows up to save us. So they pretty much allowed savings accounts for Black Americans, descendants of American slaves, or some who were formerly enslaved, to put their money in this bank. It was supposed to be paid at a high, supposed to accrue a high interest so that we could build up wealth. Congress sabotaged it by corruption. It was supposed to be savings. They allow people to do bad loans with our money without getting the permission of the account holders, my great-great-great-granduncle being one of them. And the bank collapsed, and the trillions of dollars in today's value that I would have been able to inherit, not even including the wages from slavery or the lost wages from Jim Crow, redlining, the destruction of Black Wall Streets, just from the Freeman's Bank alone, trillions of dollars in Black wealth lost, gone. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been doing this Freeman's Bank initiative, but they're doing it for people of color. Sorry, not sorry. This was not a people of color issue. This was specifically a descendant of American slaves issues. I get tired of us being people of color to death when Black Americans, not Black immigrants, but the descendants of American slaves, freedmen as we're called, we have a unique, brutal history in this country where things that were horrific were done to us and us only. You don't go to a person who's been bitten by a rattlesnake and tell them, hold on, let me go treat the rattlesnake bite from everyone else when none of them been bit. Okay, you go to the person who's been bit. Likewise, we have unique damage that has been done to us by this nation, by this government, that this government has yet to atone for, yet to repair. Joe Biden said he would have our backs, and yet he has shown to have everyone else's back by running a knife through ours. But then again, you looked at his record, you wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Now, this is something maybe you can explain. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to ask somebody who's actually from that region this question. So all of us who supported Bernie Sanders in the primaries and coming into the state, he wasn't ahead of Biden, but he was pretty close. He was pretty close. The momentum was on his side. He had won the first 3 states. Clyburn, all he had to do was say, Biden's my guy. And in spite of all the history that you're talking about with Joe Biden, and in spite of the record you're talking about with Clyburn, that's all it took. It was all over. As soon as he said that, it was all over. Why? Why?
Well, for the same reasons that we have a lot of white male Republicans who vote for Republicans like Lindsey Graham, who ain't done nothing for them, ain't good for them, has a terrible record. The same thing exists with Black American voters. Like y'all said, I can say that, y'all can't. We have this problem in the Black community where and it's starting to change now, where if it's an older Black person, everything they say is gold. Like, I love my grandparents and my great-grandparents to death. I was fortunate to even know my great-great-grandparents. Loved them all to death. But it's okay for me to criticize their decisions. It's okay for me to say your decision is not going to be best for the future. You see, they were able to see progress. Clyburn's generation, born under Jim Crow, they saw Jim Crow fall. So they were able to see progress. People from my generation, maybe even Generation X and the Generation Z, we have not seen it. What we've seen is what we have now. Black Americans, descendants of American slaves, own less homes now than we did during Jim Crow. 15 million acres of our property has been stolen because of the system of heirs property. The number one cause of lynching was not white women lying, saying a Black man was sexually inappropriate with them. It was land theft. The United States Department of Agriculture discriminating against Black landowners. 15 million acres of property stolen. So we're actually doing worse off now than my grandmother was doing, than my great-grandmother was doing. My great-grandmother died at 101 in 2015. She owned 2 homes and several properties. I can't point to anyone in my generation, my family, that has been able to have such an accomplishment as she. Not because they don't work hard. Some of them have very good jobs, but because we just can't afford it. So our wealth trajectory and our ability to progress is actually lower than it was, not for just our parents, our grandparents. Clyburn, again, it's ignorance. It is ignorant. It's ignorance of his record. It's ignorant of the fact that he has the ability to write legislation to make the lives of people in his district better. But most of all, when you're in a district, and America is a majority rule state. So at the very least, you want to make the lives of the majority of your district better. Black Americans are in a majority of his district. We are the most hurt by inequitable funding of schools. In fact, the blacker the school, the less likely that school is to have the number of college and career-ready courses to serve as prerequisites for entrance into universities. The less likely that school is to be able to offer trade and vocational training. The less likely that school is to be able to retain quality teachers. The less likely that school is to be able to have an adequate number of guidance counselors and child psychiatrists to deal with the mental and emotional needs of people. Clyburn knows these things, has not done a piece of legislation about it. He gets away with it. Land theft. I'm always going to talk about land theft. If you come here to rural South Carolina, older Black people, young Black people, we all have felt the pain of seeing our coastal land stolen from us. Us Gullah Geechee people, land is inherent to our culture. Clyburn has sat back and watched communities like Hilton Head Island go from 90% Black to now be 90% white. He has sat back and watched Bluffton, South Carolina, go from being a Gullah Geechee community to now just being a community that's majority white, known for its golf courses. He's seen the same thing happen with other sea islands off the coast of South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina, was a majority black city once. Now black people like 21%. Clyburn has sat back and watch our land get stolen and watch us be gentrified out of our lands. My plan is to make Black Americans, descendants of American slaves, a protected class, like we were after slavery ended. That's why the military was in the South. We were supposed to be protected. Once we are a protected class, the same way you can't touch reservations for Native Americans, Black American communities should be exempt from eminent domain, should be exempt from having people move in and gentrify the community. We should get compensation for our land theft. And we should get direct monetary payments for the wages that we should have inherited from the days of slavery. The same way a person can inherit wealth, and there are many people that have inherited their wealth. Talk to Warren Buffett as one good example. The same way people can inherit wealth, or the same way companies can still be functioning off of the wealth from slavery, like Wall Street, people can inherit poverty and pain and trauma. But we've also inherited the debt. The federal government, and I'm going to just close this part here, the United States of America has paid reparations before. They did it for Japanese Americans who were interned in World War II. I was 4 years old when they paid reparations to Japanese Americans. They've done it for several Native American tribes. Call them settlements, call them whatever you want, but some of them still get direct monetary payment, tax exemption, free education. I know the reservation system is not perfect, but on those reservations, they have companies there where they get all of the revenue tax-free. My great-grandfather is a World War II vet, still alive. The first thing he told me the U.S. military made them do when they defeated the Nazis was give back all of the land they had taken from the Jews. And Holocaust survivors get reparations. It is hypocritical and pure anti-Black racism for anyone to argue against the fact that the federal government owes Black Americans, descendants of American slaves, reparations for not just chattel slavery, for the lynch mobs, all the Black Wall Streets that were burnt down. It was over 50 of them. Some were burnt down, some were flooded, some were brought out by eminent domain. For Jim Crow, redlining, the way we were left out of the GI Bill, the Homestead Act, that gave trillions of dollars to white American families, but not a penny to Black American families. The federal government owes us. Clyburn's district being majority Black, he has a responsibility to push for us to get representation. He has failed to do that.
Yeah, it's funny because I always, one of the things we in the Northeast, always hear, descendants of European immigrants talk with such pride about how my grandfather came here with a nickel in his pocket and didn't speak a word of English, and he worked his heart out so that I could have a good life. It's like, yeah, because he could save the money that he worked for and pass it down to you. In this situation,
not just that, though.
Slaves.
A lot of those European immigrants, there were 4 Homestead Acts, and Homestead Acts when America was trying to get people to settle barren land. 4 of them. Abraham Lincoln signed the largest one in 1861. It gave away hundreds of millions of acres. 10% of the entire U.S. was pretty much given, not just to white Americans, but to European immigrants. When the GI Bill was signed for World War II veterans, a lot of the recipients were European immigrants that fought in World War II. My great-grandfather tells me that he had some fellow soldiers who couldn't even speak English. They were European immigrants. They spoke Italian. Some spoke Polish. They couldn't even speak English. But when they got back to America, they were given homes, healthcare, pensions. They were able to open businesses, buy land, and their kids were able to inherit those things. My grandmother, my great-grandfather's daughter, who's now deceased, she inherited nothing but poverty and the same debt that I have inherited from her, my father, and now. So even those European immigrants, they got way more than Black Americans did from being hired for jobs. Black Americans would be fired, paid lower wages. This country has been very generous to every group except for the group that built this country, was the nation, the source of its wealth, has fought to defend it in every war, and still puts in over trillions of dollars into its economy.
Yeah, so let's talk about some more of your policy platform, because we touched on that quite a bit. It's on your website. You are for tuition-free college, universal health care, a living wage. You did warn me when I reached out to you that you are anti-abortion. And so I just wanted to read this sort of point from your website and then see if you can expand upon that a little bit. Substitute abortion outside of exceptional circumstances with strong support for thriving families and communities. So do you want to just explain more specifically what you mean by that?
Yes. Abortion, the number one reason for abortion for all women, but especially for Black women who get the most abortions since 1973. Black women have been saying, when asked, the reason for them getting abortions at the highest rate, and for the majority, 80 over 97% of their reasons for abortion is because of economic hardships, poverty. It's not that they don't want their child, it's that they can't afford to care for their child. What a good politician would do, people who care about their people they serve, if they would say, you know what, instead of making abortion accessible, let's actually deal with the issues of Black poverty. If abortion is needed because of a medical emergency, that's fine. It should be there. But let's deal with the issue of Black poverty so that these women can give birth to their child and raise their child like they want to. What we have seen in America in regards to Black Americans is that, one, you go to a Black neighborhood, we don't have good infrastructure. Hell, we can't even get clean water. Denmark, South Carolina is one example, Flint, Michigan, another. We don't have good paying jobs. We don't have good schools. 15 to 20% of the population, conservatively of America, were over 55% of the homeless. High unemployment rate, gun violence sky high because of lack of mental, emotional trauma, and lack of opportunity. But we have abortion clinics. It's been shown that abortion clinics are more likely to be in closer distance to majority Black neighborhoods than any other racial or ethnic group. Instead of making abortion clinics accessible, let's make good jobs accessible. Let's make tuition-free, quality universities and colleges accessible. Let's make affordable, quality housing accessible. Let's make good infrastructure accessible. Let's make good schools accessible. Let's make a living wage accessible. You don't tell people who say, I'm hungry, you say to them, okay, well, here's your option. You can either starve to death or you can eat these poison berries and kill yourself. No, you give them nutritious food. What America has been doing is ignoring Black women saying, we want to have our kids, we just can't afford it. Instead of saying, well, here's good policies to deal with the causes of abortion. No, here's an abortion clinic, take care. No, 20 million Black babies have been aborted since the 1970s. Everyone knows that numbers, the reason why you got Joe Biden tripping over himself, talk about Hispanics are the future, which Hispanic could be any race, white, Black, Asian, Native American, mixed, whatever. But the reason he's tripping over himself, saying that the Hispanic ethnicity is the future, is because of their numbers. By the way, their numbers aren't that much higher than Black American descendants of American slaves. That's a whole other discussion. So it's hypocritical to say one group is the future because of their numbers while telling the group that is still owed a debt from America, abort your babies, that's justice for you, and that's lowering our numbers. So I am for supporting families, a living wage, government-provided quality childcare, revamping the way we look at social services. Social services have historically been oppressive to Black families, taking Black kids, throwing Black parents in jail instead of getting Black family support. I plan to revamp the way the Department of Social Services work, helping families not just get their head above the water, bring them out the water, okay? Helping to provide for their needs emotionally, mentally, and physically. Free, like I said, free healthcare. That's a human right to me. Investing in communities to have green spaces, investing in business grants and helping people in the community start nonprofits by means of making grants available so that they can help solve the issues in their own community while also being a source of employment. You need to make having a family possible. This ain't just for Black people either. There's all this uproar about Americans not having as many children any longer. Well, one, you can't afford to have children, and two, people are aborting kids. We need to make it where people will want to have children.
Yeah, you're making a very
Okay, but
profound point here, which
but
is something that I think the left has missed for a long time, which is, and I've almost thought of writing like a series of essays that I could even package into a book about family values for the left. I think the left has not expressed enough reverence for the family. That doesn't necessarily mean the traditional family with the white picket fence and the man going to work. That's kind of a bullshit thing. That was really only a dominant thing for about 20 years, and even then it wasn't really dominant. It was just something that sort of found its way into the media culture of what we think of as like Leave It to Beaver, all that shit, right? But yeah, I think that's a very, very profound point, and we could talk for a long time about that, but I know we have to wrap fairly soon. So Russell, do you have a quick thing, and then I have one more question.
Yeah, I mean that's really an argument for setting up social policies that make less people want to have abortion. It's not an argument for making it illegal. There would still be a certain number of people who would want to have abortions anyway, even with those things in place. Shouldn't they be allowed to make that choice for themselves?
Once a baby, and that's how I look at it, has a beating heart and cerebral activity, no, you should not be allowed to make that choice. That
What
is
about
no
before
longer.
that?
Before that, fine. Doesn't have a beating heart or cerebral activity, so that's fine. But
So
once
first
that
trimester,
child,
you're saying?
the first trimester, right? Once that child has a beating heart and cerebral activity, that child, in my eyes, is a human being, because once that abortion takes place, that heart starts beating. I know there's all this scientific language, zygote, or it's just a collection of cells. Well, technically, we all are a collection of cells. Malcolm X said the Black woman was the most unprotected being in America. I disagree with Malcolm X, and I agree with him on many things, but I disagree with him there. Black children have historically been the most unprotected being in America. It was Black children torn out of their mother's stomach. Black children had to start picking cotton and growing rice at age 4. Black children in Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, and our swamps were fed to alligators used as alligator bait. For people who think that's an urban legend, no, it is true. It was Black children have historically not been protected. Even right now, ages 5 to 12, Black children are more likely to commit suicide than white children. That has never happened in America in any age group where Black people commit suicide more than white. For the first time in history, ages 5 to 12, a Black child is more likely to kill himself or herself than a white child. Black children need protection. I'm not, Republicans are pro-birth. They don't care about the quality of life. They just want the child to be born, and then if the child is killed, in their apartment, like Breonna Taylor, or if the child needs access to health care, they don't care. I am truly pro-life. I want that child's life to be preserved in the womb, and I want that child to have a good quality of life outside the womb. I want that for their child. I want that for that child's mother and for that child's father. But a child with a beating heart is no longer an option. That's a human being whose life deserves to be preserved.
All right, let me ask you one more question, because I know we have to wrap at 8:30. I know we have a hard out coming out, but this was something that caught my eye. Your car buying and maintenance assistance plans, because this speaks to an experience as someone who lives in a rural area where you need a car. I mean, I always wondered, as someone who lived in and around New York City his whole life, why are people out in the country so obsessed with their cars? They know everything about their car. I don't really know much about cars. And then I drove cross country. I'm like, holy shit, yeah. These guys better have a good car, because otherwise they can't get nowhere, and they better learn about it, and they better, maintain it, and they have to be able to pay to maintain it. And when you're poor in a rural area, a minor car mishap can upend your whole life. And so I think this is a really interesting idea of yours that speaks very uniquely to where you're from. So do you want to talk about that set of ideas before we wrap?
I would love to. Transportation is literally, like the lifeblood of being able to survive in a rural area. People always, in that thing, we got to change the image of rural. People think rural, they think a white guy with a baseball cap on, wearing camouflage gear, going hunting with a pickup truck. There are many Black Americans who live in rural areas too, especially in the South. Man, especially in the South. Transportation is a major issue. Black Americans are the most likely to be without a vehicle than any other group. If it's something bad, we're always to the top of it, unfortunately, when it comes to something that negatively impacts a quality of life. So I have seen parents, white and Black, who literally can get a flat tire and they go without food for a day or two because that was the money they had to spend on their flat tire. I have known people who live out in some of the very rural areas in my district, like Tarboro, Garnett. These people, they have Savannah, Georgia is the closest city to us. Depending on where you are, yeah, Savannah, Georgia is usually a close city to us. Some have only been as far as Savannah their entire life, have never been beyond Savannah. They only leave the house to go grocery shopping and maybe to go to school and maybe to go to work. There's no recreational activities. And a lot of times, some of them live in deep poverty because they can't get to work. Without a car, if you live 20 miles from your job, how are you going to get to work? How are you going to get to the doctor? A parent-teacher conference, how you go shopping for clothes. And even if you can get to a grocery store, is it going to be a grocery store that's going to offer you nutritious food? A lot of times in my community, we get grocery stores like a Dollar General that don't usually have a wide variety of foods. Food is highly processed. So that leads to more health issues. And that leads to them having to get to the doctor where they always cannot get to. And that leads to a high preponderance of things like hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, strokes, you name it. So my car buyer and car maintenance assistance program will be similar to what we see for home buyer assistance programs, where we will help people who qualify. Those details are forthcoming, be able to buy a vehicle, help them with the first 3 down payments. That's my vision. Then the same way we give people an EBT card to help them be able to purchase food for themselves. We will give people a car maintenance card, and we will partner with the private sector. There's a lot of mechanics in my area. They will go to our network of mechanics and be able to use that card as money towards getting a flat tire change or getting the brakes change, an air filter change, oil change. Because a lot of times, it's happened to me as a kid. Okay, I got a car, but I wasn't able to drive it for months. I couldn't afford to get the tires changed I needed to. And then if something went wrong, I would have to find a ride, which would be horrific. Some people can afford a car, can't afford insurance, can barely afford gas. Something goes wrong with the car, they can't even use the vehicle they have. It becomes more of a liability than an asset. I want to make owning a car an asset. But my other plan is also to make communities to where we don't have to rely on cars so often. Building communities closer to the city center and incentivizing public transportation for rural areas. So I also want us to get away from having to be so car reliant and bring back a sense of walkable communities again.
Excellent. Just to touch one more thing, because you keep mentioning healthcare and doctor's visits and healthcare deserts in your area. I just think it has to be said before we wrap. I can't think of any better metaphor for the dysfunction of our system that you have James Clyburn accepting, pardon me, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of checks from Big Pharma every cycle, and yet his home district is a healthcare desert. I think it's with the highest percentage of uninsured people in all of South Carolina are right in his backyard. And this is the guy, the top recipient of pharma donor money has the highest uninsured rate of any district in his state. I mean, what says it better than that?
And he claims to be for, I don't know what, this vague term, healthcare expansion. I don't know what that means. Say it with your chest. Healthcare is a human right. This country can afford it, and we should have done it a long, long time ago.
Oh, well, he talks that shit more than any of them. He talks that shit, opportunity, access, affordability. I mean, he uses those buzzwords more than everybody. Everyone should have access and opportunity to affordable this and that. He does that he does that probably more than any other person I know in government. And now you see why. Because his people have a theoretical access to it, but it's not a real access to it. There's no opportunity. There's no equality. It's certainly not treated as a right in his mind, and I think his district is a perfect reflection of that.
My people, and the sad thing is the majority of the people here are Black, and the majority of people with the worst health outcomes are Black, getting their arms and legs chopped off left and right because they don't have access to nutritious food and they don't have access to health care. So it's a bad cycle. But he gets by with this because, one, the media protects him. They protect him by not calling him out on his record. They protect him by not having me on. I can't tell you how many times the media has mentioned James Clyburn, knowing I've done over 50 interviews, knowing that in just 6 months I raised over $200,000. A person brand new to politics, never entered it, never had no connections, and yet they will act as if he's not being challenged. And people also let him get away with it because people just don't know his awful record. Some of us have normalized awfulness, thinking that this is good. We deserve better than this. So my mission, and I think I've done pretty well. Come what may, I think I've done pretty well of one, holding him accountable for his record. Because now more people are looking at him, looking at his record, looking back at him and saying, you got to explain this. I've also let people know that we have been short, we've gotten the short end of the stick. No, we've gotten whipped with the stick. We deserve far better than what he's been giving us. Because while we are living in poverty, his family, according to a report, has been getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from him in campaign donations, and he has been building up golf courses for himself, one of them that is built on a cemetery of deceased descendants of American slaves. And he just gets away with it.
Really?
People don't know about it. Yes, his golf center in Columbia, South Carolina is built on a cemetery of Black American slaves. And he puts a net up to stop the balls from going over where they think the tombstones are. But why would you want to be there in the first place? How disrespectful to his lineage and my lineage.
That's another.
This.
You talk about a purely Democrat thing. We put a net so the golf balls don't hit where the tombstones are on the slave. So yeah, wow. Anyway, Marcel, you made a liar out of me because I swore I was never going to support a Democrat ever again, but I'm going to encourage people to vote for you if they live in South Carolina 6. So real quick, before we wrap, how do people get involved? I know the primary is a week away.
Well, voting started already May 31st to June 10th is early voting. The June 14th is the election day. MarcelForCongress.com /donate. Clyburn has put more billboards up, yard signs up than I've ever seen him do. He's trying to do commercials, I've heard lately. He's doing speaking tours. This is the most he's ever had to work. So if nothing else, we've shown the Democrats like him and Nancy Pelosi, you don't just get our votes and then sit there and relax. You got to work for our votes. But this is only the beginning, because win or lose, I'm going to still be on his tail, holding him accountable. This is the beginning of a new era in him and his daughter that he wants to run after him to take his seat, because, you know, it's a monarchy apparently around here nowadays. They better get used to it.
Please clap.